The story begins 60 years ago, during the summer of 1953, when 9 leaders of the American Communist Party were arrested in Philadelphia and charged in violation of the Smith Act for conspiracy to overthrow the United States government by force or violence. The arrest came after a long period of FBI surveillance and resulted in the longest criminal trial in the Eastern Pennsylvania federal courts at the time. One of these 9 men, Joseph Roberts, was my grandfather. Growing up, I knew only 3 things about this man: that he immigrated to the United States from the Ukraine at the age of 14, he was Jewish, and a communist. Last August, I went to Philadelphia because I wanted to see the city where my grandfather lived for 13 years, the city where my father was raised. I went because I believed that these places might give me a tangible way to experience a history and a person that remains unknown to me. I traveled to Philadelphia to ask my grandfather questions about inheritance and belonging, what was passed down and what was left behind. For example, why was I never taught how to swim, despite how close I have always lived to the Pacific Ocean? It is as though I was never taught how to live beside the coast of California, never taught that that body of water is a place I belong. And yet I have always felt I belong in certain political movements, never questioning their validity or my place within them, as though there is an unknown but familiar force propelling me forward. In 1953, the hysteria of the McCarthy era was at its peak.
To a substantial degree, in one form or another, socialism has spread the shadow of human regimentation over most of the nations of the earth, and the shadow is encroaching upon our own liberty. The communist fifth columnists among us are working for world dictatorship. To accomplish this, their strategy is to undermine the confidence of our people in the American system and the principles on which it stands.
In 1953, Ethel and Julius Rosenberg were charged with espionage and executed in New York. The House Committee of Un-American Activities was a permanent fixture in Congress. It was a time when schools conducted mandatory drills, preparing students for the day that the atomic bomb fell from, quote, enemy planes, and bomb shelters were made in basements of buildings. This is a photograph of my mother in her hometown of Trenton, New Jersey, where you can see the bomb shelter sign on the building in the background. It was a time of ideological repression and fabricated fear of communists, or, as they were called at the time, the Reds. In 1953, my grandfather moved from New York City, where he worked as the general manager for the Daily Worker, the Communist Party newspaper, to Philadelphia to work as the chairperson and district organizer for the Communist Party's Eastern Pennsylvania chapter. The party's headquarters were located at 250 South Broad Street on the 7th floor in the old Schubert Theater building. Meetings were held here every Monday at 9 a.m. It is easy to romanticize my grandfather. The more time I spend with Joe in libraries and archives, in file folders and newspaper articles, the larger his legacy becomes. He was a member of the Young Communist League. He was active in the Garment Workers Union and organized pickets with the Civil Rights Congress. As my generation stumbles to find its political footing, I think about Joe and the fervor I imagine he embodied. How he organized masses of people, how he raised his children with the belief in the brotherhood of all man, the intrinsic value of each human being, and how he believed that revolution would come, not through force or violence, but because the people would eventually choose a different system of government, a different way of being together in the world. I wonder about the differences between this period of time and the unsteady terrain of my own political organizing. Until recently, the political efforts that my generation was most known for, critical mass bike rides, urban gardens, free schools, collective houses, create alternatives to the existing order. But are they substitutes for direct confrontation with the current economic system? Have we lost this belief somewhere over the years? What form does it take now? In the midst of my trip, the Occupy Wall Street movement erupted in cities throughout the country. Its sentiments harkened back to my grandfather's time as the largely middle-class, majority white protesters woke from a deep slumber to join the fight for economic justice. With each meeting or march I attended, I felt a direct line to Joe. And yet, in the wake of the initial eruption, questions persisted. If I could, I would ask Joe how to build movements that challenge the divisions that capitalism creates, and how to persist in the face of increasing state violence.